Welcome to Tales from the Fandom, a podcast that brings a special guest out of the multiverse and straight to you. And now your host, David Ginsburg.
Hello everybody and welcome to the next episode of Tales from the Fandom. This is our book trek special. Every 15th of the month I try and have a book that we are talking about here on the podcast. I apologize that we missed out on December's episode of the Iron Druid Chronicles Book 4 Tricked with Jaquel. We both were extremely busy with the holidays and sickness and just things going on, and we could not get the time to record. So for that, we apologize. However, we are hoping to have that episode come out in February. But today's episode is with author Emily Martin. She is the author of the Creatures of Light Trilogy. The first book in that series is called Woodwalker, which is an excellent book, and I definitely recommend that you check it out. So she joins us to talk about her early influences before she became an author, and then we talk about her works, as well as the fact that her third book in the trilogy comes out a week after this episode, give or take. So definitely take a listen to this episode, listen to us talk about her books and her other fandom influences, and then go out and get some books to read because they're very, very enjoyable. And I hope that you have a great listen to this. Thanks a lot.
I'm Megan.
I'm RJ.
And we host Oh No Lit Class, a comedy literature podcast that tells you all the strange and sexy facts you never knew about the books you had to read in school.
Every episode is a fun, foul-mouthed spark notes for your ears, filled with author bios, plot summaries, bad impressions, and Megan singing.
It's mostly you that sings.
No, I sing well, she sings poorly.
That's not true. So come listen to us ruin classic literature one book at a time at ohnolitclass.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
Oh No Lit Class. We're for kids.
No, we're not.
And welcome to the latest episode of Tales from the Fandom. Today I am joined by Emily B. Martin, author and illustrator, and I am so happy to have her here after getting to learn about her books through one of my previous guests, Sadie Geerligs. Welcome to the podcast, Emily.
Hey, thanks for having me.
It is absolutely my pleasure. I guess first off, you are an author, illustrator, and you're also a national park person with you wear the hat, right?
I do. I wear the silly hat. Yep, I'm a park ranger. Mm-hmm.
That's awesome. How did you get into that? Just out of curiosity before we dive into fandom life.
Yeah, sure. That's actually my what I went to school for. I went undergrad and graduate school in Parks and Protected Area Management, and did some internship work with the National Park Service and my master's research with the National Park Service, and got in uniform a couple years later. And it's been really fun. I only work seasonally, so I work over the summer. But it gives me a lot of really great writing material and kind of led into what I often call my signature style is sort of this nature nerd fantasy adventure. So there's a lot of adventuring and nature geekery that pops up that's really drawn from my experience in the ranger hat. So
that is so cool. Now, you have published books, and you have a new book coming out in January, which is super awesome.
Mm-hmm.
I've read the first book in that series, but what were some of those fandoms when you were a kid that were like influential to you?
Yeah, there are a couple. So I'm part of that Harry Potter generation, so I really kind of grew with Harry. I aged with Harry. And read the first book way back when it had really just come out. I think my mom heard about it on NPR and got it for me. And I dressed up like Harry for Halloween that year, and nobody knew who I was. They thought I was, just a witch or something. And and that was a big, finding that community of readers. I mean, what a phenomenon in terms of just books and readership, and being part of that, getting to kind of age with that was really cool. And had influence on my art as well, because I started following some Harry Potter artists who had a very different style than I did at the time, and kind of morphed my style with theirs. So Harry Potter was a big one. Lord of the Rings was probably my biggest fandom, as my poor parents can attest to. through high school and really into college and beyond. And what was kind of neat about Lord of the Rings is that it sort of went from being a very kind of fangirl type relationship to a more sort of scholarly, like diving into the appendices and fleshing out these really long, like 200,000 word fan fictions about, the implications of the abduction of Celebrian and all this kind of stuff. So that was really fun. Probably the one that's had the biggest impact on my writing has been a very small fandom, very small but very passionate fandom for a series of books called the Queen's Thief series by Megan Whalen Turner, and it's not a super well known series, but it's the people who've read it and are in that fandom are very, very fervent about it. So it's just a really neat series full of political intrigue and unreliable narrators and twists and turns, and has really inspired a lot of my own work.
Awesome. Well, let's start with Harry Potter. And every guest that I have on that we talk about Harry Potter, I always ask, what house are you?
Yes, I'm a Ravenclaw.
Okay. You join. I've had many Hufflepuffs and Ravenclaws, so you join a large house in this podcast world, at least in my podcast.
Yeah, that's funny. I feel like we're all kind of cut from the same cloth, similar cloth anyway.
And who's your favorite character in this series?
Oh man, it's hard not to love the Weasley twins. Hermione was always such a great character. She accomplished so much and was so strong in so many ways that we up to that point didn't really get to see a whole lot of. So she was great. Gosh, I don't know. There's so many. I like McGonagall a lot. I like Professor McGonagall. I feel like I have a very strong relationship with McGonagall. So yeah, but the Weasley twins I think were always pretty high up on my list.
Why the Weasley twins? Is it just because of the way that they act, or their camaraderie, their duo-ship?
Yeah, all that and more. I guess. Yeah, I guess they had such a depth of character while still kind of maintaining who they were. They were sort of the comic relief, but they also had a real depth to them, and you saw that in the way they cared for their family and they cared for each other and cared about their impact on the world beyond just being goofy. Mm-hmm. And that was really cool. But it was, I mean, how do you just they're just funny, and that's great.
And of course, the other question that lends itself well to this fandom, Harry Potter, is which book is your favorite?
I really like The Prisoner of Azkaban. But I also like, I reread the series not too long ago, and I actually liked The Goblet of Fire a whole lot more than I remembered liking the first time around. And I'm not sure, I don't know that I can put my finger on it, but Prisoner of Azkaban and Goblet of Fire, I think, are two of my favorites.
Why specifically Prisoner of Azkaban? Because that's my favorite, and I feel like for me, not only is it like the book that doesn't have Voldemort, but it's the book where it seems like after this book, like everything changes after what happens in the events. Like it just starts going in such a direction that it like for me it kind of catches you off guard.
Yeah, it really does. It does feel like sort of the turning point of the series. And I guess in my mind, they've always sort of been split up that way, like the first three and then the last four. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I guess I really like. I don't know that I can put my finger on it. I really like the character of Remus Lupin. I think that's a big draw for probably a lot of people. I loved his relationship with Harry, and then kind of ultimately what you find out, about all their relationships. I guess you get such a tie-in to Harry's past and all of these different players in Harry's past, which are also players in Harry's future, or present and future. Yeah, and I don't know. I guess the first two books were kind of like fun sort of romps, and then this one really felt like it had big implications. I mean, the other two had big implications too, but it really felt like it was opening the gateway for, like you said, sort of the gravity of the next four books in the series. So, but I really like Remus Lupin. I really like Sirius Black, and that was it was neat kind of seeing that dynamic and what it meant for Harry and his friends.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And you're right. Like it it adds that layer of history that you don't know about Harry and his parents and his family and their relationship, and it's so much fun. And it's one of those movies where even the movie, while like there's some stuff where I don't like about the movie, but that's with every movie. It's one of those movies where it's just like the director with, I think is Alfonso Cuarón, just so I don't know. It's like it had that darkness to it.
Yeah, yeah. And I felt like, now that I think about it, I felt like that particular movie hit a lot closer to the heart of the books than maybe the first two did. And I haven't seen the movies in a long time. I'm definitely more a fan of the books than of the movies. But I remember coming away from that particular movie and being like, that one felt more right. You know, there was more, like you said, just that little bit of darkness, but still kind of whimsical. And I don't know, it felt more like the heart of the books than the first two did, for sure.
Yeah, it's funny that you said that you haven't seen the movies in a long time, because my family and I, like, we're always on the weekends. It's usually we're sitting around and we'll be flipping channels or whatever. And on Freeform, which used to be ABC Family, it seems like every weekend they have a Harry Potter marathon.
Yeah. And I guess when I say I haven't seen them in a while, I mean, it's been like last year, so it hasn't been like forever. Yeah, we just did the Lord of the Rings marathon, so maybe Harry Potter is up next.
Okay, yeah, my kids are still just shy. I think they've got a few more, like another year or two before we can dive into Lord of the Rings. But they've definitely seen some Harry Potter.
Yeah, get them started early.
That's right. I made them read the first book up to the Sorting Hat chapter before I let them get sorted on Pottermore, so they could find out what houses they were.
Nice. Good. That's a good foundation.
Yeah, two out of 3.
My girls are suddenly interested in Star Wars too. So we're trying to kind of figure out, they're like 3 and 5. So we're like, I don't know. Is this kind of too scary for you or not? So we'll see.
Yeah, it's definitely a case by case thing. Like one of my kids is always like, "Oh, I want to watch horror movies." And we're like, "Yeah, but we don't want you in our bed."
Right, we also want you to sleep in your own room. Yeah.
Now, one of the other ones that you had mentioned was something that I've never heard of, and it's a book series by Megan Whalen Turner, and it's the Queen's Thief series.
Yes.
Tell me more.
Sure. So, people who follow me on social media know that I probably could stand to talk a lot less about the series, but I just love it so much. So it's, as of right now, it's a series of 5 books, and they've been written over a 20-year period. So the first one, The Thief, came out in 90, it was right around Harry Potter. It was 96 or 97, I can't remember. And I think it won the 97 Newbery Honor Award. It's on my bookshelf. I can get it down. But and so it's been several years in between each book. And so we're kind of used to this sort of long, agonizing wait between installments. But what it's done is created this fandom that's kind of sort of our calling card, is going back and picking back over each of the stories. And the really cool thing about Megan Whalen Turner's books is that they're written to hold up to that kind of scrutiny. Like the first book, most of the books, there is some kind of twist at the end, some kind of unreliable narrator that gives the book the ability to be read many, many times and pick up on different stuff every single time. And she has this ability to kind of make you fall in love with characters sort of retroactively, like 2 or 3 books later. Characters that I really didn't like upon reading the first time. You know, I keep reading the series and then I'm like, oh my gosh, that's the greatest character ever. And I go back and reread the series with a set of fresh eyes. So yeah, it's, and a lot of it is, I think what I really loved about it as a kid was that it felt like a grown-up series while still being something that my mom would let me read, you know, be happy about me reading. It felt adult because the characters' ages are very ambiguous. You're not really sure who's young, who's very young, and who's very old, or who's in the middle. I mean, there are certainly like mentor characters, but the ages are not very well defined. And so which is kind of funny to me because today in the book industry today, the literary world today, if you're going to write a young adult novel, that character had better be 17 years old or thereabouts, or it almost cannot be classified young adult. And it's funny looking back on that series because the ages were never really set. And in fact, the protagonist in the first book was probably pretty young, like 10, 12, years old in that first book. And at least that's my take on it. And so it's just kind of funny seeing this series seems to break all the rules of what the literary world is looking for today, but it's still held up for its readers, for 20 plus years. And so these characters are dealing with adult issues like running countries and, all this political intrigue and allies and war and all this kind of stuff, and relationships between people, marriages, political alliances, heirs, having children. But none of it is written in a way that wouldn't be appropriate for younger readers. And I think that's what really drew me in. And they're really, really smart books. They're a lot smarter than me most of the time. And like I said, it takes me several reads to like actually catch on to what she was, she's going for in each book. But yeah, so a lot of that kind of seeped into my own work of wanting that feeling of maturity while still having sort of a lighthearted, adventurous core to it. Mm-hmm. Lots of really clever characters who are always making the most of whatever tight situation they're in, and able to be read many, many times. I really like that aspect of them. So, yeah, that's it's one of my favorite series, and I could probably talk for the entire hour about it. But yeah.
If you were going to say, to recommend this book, if you liked insert book here, you would like the Queen's Thief book series.
Ooh, yeah, that's hard because I still haven't found a series that seems to do a lot of the same things. If you liked, so to take another recent kind of hit, Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo is similar in terms of like the kind of devious characters always making the most of what life is throwing at them. The sort of high stakes political environment, resting on kind of that, in the hands of a couple of characters. So if you like that kind of thing, and I think actually now that I think of it, Leigh Bardugo is a fan of Megan Whalen Turner. I've seen her post about it, which is really funny. So yeah, if you liked that series, you'd probably like the Queen's Thief series. And it's funny because some people, so I think because I got into it as a kid, as a child, I have that like childhood devotion to it. But it's stood up over time. A lot of the other books that I read as a kid, I've gone back and reread, and either they don't resonate with me anymore, or they don't hold my interest anymore, or I just don't relate to them anymore. But this series has kind of grown with me, and that's been a really cool thing to see. So hopefully even readers who come to it as an adult would find something to enjoy, I think, in the series. But I'm biased.
It's definitely intriguing to me because I love those kind of books where, you read it and then you go back and reread it and you pick up on something. Yeah. And like there have been book series where I've read like the first 5 books and then they start at book 6 or book 7 and they reference back to things in book 1 or 2 and you're like, wait a minute, what? And I like those are some of my favorite things where it just builds those layers and then you're like, wait a minute, what?
Right. Yeah. Wait a second. That's where this was going. Yeah. Yeah, and I guess I didn't really give a good overview of like what the series is about, but it's set in this sort of kind of ancient Greek type setting, which is really cool because that's kind of different from a lot of sort of the pseudo kind of medieval Europe type settings in a lot of these fantasy books. But there's a real sense that it's grounded in reality, and Megan Whalen Turner does this a lot through mythology and kind of her pantheon of gods and goddesses and sort of the lyricism that she approaches those mythologies with. And then the main character in the first book, the book is called The Thief, and the main character is a young thief who sort of is sent in multiple ways on a journey to kind of retrieve an item that's going to achieve stability in this little series of kind of ancient Greek countries, and things turn out very differently than than the reader at first anticipates. So yeah, it's a pretty great series.
Okay. And then you had mentioned one more, which I wanted to get to before we start talking about your works, and that is J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings series. And you said you first read The Hobbit at 8 years old?
Yes, my dad read it to me, actually.
Okay.
He read me the book, and the most enduring memory I have of it is I guess he was reading it to me while we were traveling, and we were flying. I don't even remember where we were flying. We were probably going to see family or something. We were taking this late night plane flight. I mean, it was like past midnight, and he was reading me the book, but he was doing all the voices of all the characters. And we were at the scene where they're fleeing the goblins, and the goblins are setting fire to the trees, and they're singing the song 15 birds in 5 fir trees, their feathers were fanned in a fiery breeze. And my dad was doing this like goblin voice on this plane full of people trying to sleep, and it was like mortifying to me at the time, but of course now it's the only thing, it's the most enduring vision of The Hobbit for me. So yeah, he first read it to me then, and then I really kind of, I guess it was one of my first epic fantasies, really, and it kind of lodged in my brain, and I reread it almost every year, and tried, like many people, I think, tried jumping into Lord of the Rings too early, and realized it was nothing like The Hobbit, and kind of backed away and didn't touch it again for a while. And then when I was in high school, was when the films first came out. And so kind of in preparation for the films, I was like, well, I guess I should try to actually read the series. And so I kind of struggled through Fellowship of the Ring, went and saw the movie. And I think at that age, it really helped to have a face to put with each character.
Mm-hmm.
And so came back with that kind of, mental picture, read the book again, read the rest of the trilogy. And then it just kind of, spiraled out of control from there. I mean, I went into the Book of Lost Tales, the Book of Unfinished Tales, the Silmarillion, and it really snowballed from there. So it was kind of launched by, I was into The Hobbit for most of my childhood, but then it was sort of launched by the release of the films for sure.
Okay, yeah, I was gifted the book series when I was, I think, 10 or 11, like The Hobbit plus the Lord of the Rings books.
Yeah.
And The Hobbit, easy, devoured it. I think it took a few days back when I was that, I think I was 10, 11-ish. And then I read Fellowship. And my thing, and I think I've mentioned it a few times, is that Merry and Pippin, I always figured those were girl hobbits. I like it. I
just wish they were. That would have been great.
Yeah, it just never connected with me. I was like, okay, they're girl hobbits, and then I had nightmares from the Ring Wraiths. So that was my formative years with it. But I've read them. It's not like I read them every year, but I do on occasion go back and read them.
Yeah.
And it's definitely, it's one of those ones where I'm glad that I read it when I did, because it like that and like Star Trek are the formations of my childhood.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and it's funny. Some people, I feel like people either feel kind of one way or the other about Lord of the Rings. There are a lot of authors who really don't like Lord of the Rings, and I get it. It's not everybody's cup of tea. The style, especially in a book like the Silmarillion, it's not for everybody. But it's really fun to be in those communities where it is, that is their cup of tea, and people just can totally just geek out about and I was really blessed in high school to have this group of friends who were exactly that way. I mean, we were like learning Elvish to pass notes to each other in band class and stuff. So, I was definitely in that crowd, one of those people. So, so it's always really fun to be with a bunch of huge Lord of the Rings nerds who totally embrace their nerdiness, I think.
Definitely. It's always for my friends, it was always a split of, well, I'll watch the movies, but I'm not reading the books, or I love the books, and they left out my favorite things in the movies.
How dare they leave out Tom Bombadil? Yeah.
Yes, that was probably one of the biggest rants from one of my college friends was about Tom Bombadil.
Yeah, a very polarizing issue. Yeah, I think it's really funny. I see validity in both sides of the argument. You know, he's kind of weird, he's kind of wacky, but that scene actually, the Tom Bombadil scene, leads into one of my favorite scenes in the entire trilogy, which isn't in the movies, which is the barrow right scene, where the hobbits are trapped inside the barrows, and the creepy, like, the singing, and like they're all dressed up in like the fancy clothes and like lying there, like, you know, it's creepy. It's really, I mean, I remember getting chills from that scene. But then of course Tom Bombadil comes back and is like, everyone take off your clothes and run around naked on the grass, and like that's the thing. So yeah. It's kind of funny. It's like, way to kill the vibe here, Tom. I don't know. So yeah, I see the points on both sides about Tom Bombadil. But
Yeah, you know, the movies, the Lord of the Rings series, because that's another hotly debated topic, is Lord of the Rings movie series did well with the time that they were given, and then on the other, like the flip side, the Hobbit trilogy of movies, it was kind of like, did you really need 3 movies at 12 hours for them?
Did you really need to? Yeah, I was so sad about the Hobbit series, and I tend to just not. Yeah. My friends know not to bring it up around me because I tend to like get really worked up about it. But yeah, I felt like they I felt like they didn't approach it with the same integrity that they did with Lord of the Rings. And yeah, so much of the fluff and the filling was so unnecessary, and they just lost the heart of the story. One of my favorite parts about The Hobbit is that so much of it is done, the whole point of it is that it has to be done quietly, right? Sneakily, stealthily. They're not an army of dwarves. They're not armed to the teeth and able to march on the mountain and fight the dragon. They have to do it sneakily, which is funny because it's not the dwarves' nature. And that's kind of what makes Bilbo such the perfect protagonist, because he's not a warrior. He's just this, you know, quiet little nobody, really. And the movies, I think, just totally stood that on its head, and made everything this huge spectacle. And, you know, the fact that the whole third movie was the Battle of Five Armies, which is like a chapter and a half, if that, you know. Just, I don't know. I was pretty disappointed. But Martin Freeman was fantastic, and I love Lee Pace as Thranduil, and yeah, and Richard Armitage, of course, as Thorin was great. So.
Yeah, it's funny. Like, I saw the first one in the theaters, and then I didn't really, like, I wasn't feeling it, so I didn't see the other two until they hit, like, DVD or Blu-ray. And then after all 3 had come out, what was funny is that I found, like, websites that were like, oh, look, we have the Hobbit cut of the Hobbit movies, where they cut it to, they followed exactly like the Hobbit book.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
Anything extra was cut out, and so they recut all 3 movies into like a 2.5-hour movie.
I would actually be really interested in seeing that. Yeah, it was pretty disappointed. Yeah, I was kind of the same way. I saw, because with Lord of the Rings, my friends and I mean, we went to the midnight showings, we dressed up, we had parties, and then The Hobbit, you know, we went, of course, now my husband and I, like, you know, we have kids, and it's like, it's 8:00 and you want to start a movie now, like, that's the stage of life we're at. But we still, like, we went to see The Hobbit, and I was like, oh man, I'm not gonna keep paying, you know, $20 for us to come and see this in the theater. So yeah, it's the same kind of thing. We kind of waited until they came out and sort of got them on DVD and kind of reluctantly watched them. So yeah, it was pretty sad. And it was a shame because, again, I feel like so many of the actors put so much heart into I mean, particularly Richard Armitage as Thorin, and Martin Freeman as Bilbo, and you know, some of the other characters. I mean, again, I love Lee Pace, and his character Thranduil was maybe not exactly what the book was going for, but it was still a really, I don't know, I like Lee Pace a lot. So it's such a shame because I feel like those performances were so fantastic and so, I don't know, so true to the heart of their characters in a certain sense, and that just the rest of the movies just completely failed them. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, let's get away from that sad topic.
On that note.
On that note, you are a published author, yes. And I like I said in the introduction, I came across your book because one of my friends that I've had on the podcast a few times, Sadie,
Yeah.
had, I think, tweeted about your books, and
Oh, that's so
you
cool.
had responded back to her
Yeah.
about like, oh, you would make a great Mona, I
She
think, as far as like a
would.
cosplay goes.
Yeah.
And like I told Sadie this on like we had an episode that's coming out in December, and I said, I don't normally like stray from the books that I read because I only have such a limited time with work and kids and everything
Sure.
else. And I ordered your book like the day that you and her had that conversation. Like, I ordered your book, I got it in, I read the book, I like emailed Sadie, and I was like, I finished the book, it's so great. And like, I guess to start off with is that I'll give the name of the book, and that was Woodwalker, which is the first book of the Creatures of Light trilogy that you have.
Yes.
And I guess to start off with, how did you come up with the idea of Woodwalker? Like, was it from your national parks work, or was it something that you had already and then it just kind of formed?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks, Sadie. She's so cool, and I love seeing all of her cosplay stuff. We met at one of the little local conventions in our area, and that was really cool. And she would be a perfect Mona, FYI. Yeah. So Woodwalker. So I've always written. My friend and I have been writing stories together since elementary school, middle school, really. And so I've always written as a hobby, and a lot of it is fan fiction, a lot of it is Lord of the Rings fan fiction, and the character of May, what's funny is that people often disparage fan fiction, but it's been a fantastic tool to learn storytelling. What makes a good story, what makes a good character and a strong plot and a strong character arc, and you can do that. I kind of think of it as sort of an incubator. Like, you can kind of flex your muscles without doing too much of the legwork of building your own world. And so it gives you a stepping stone, I feel like, to really build your writing chops. So actually Woodwalker has a lot of roots in Lord of the Rings. And it doesn't feel that much like it anymore. But when I first started, it had a very kind of Lord of the Rings feel. And some of the bones are still there, like big, long, epic quests and sort of a ranger character. But it really kind of developed its own sort of life. And that was a lot of the big motivator for me was writing in Tolkien's world. There weren't a lot of female characters who could sort of hold their own on the page. They were always sideline characters, very much defined by the fact that they were women in this kind of boys' world and boys' story. And that started feeling very constricting to me. And so I that's when I started kind of branching out and writing my own characters. And May was really born, May is the protagonist of Woodwalker. And she was kind of born from that sense of wanting a world where a woman could do the same kinds of things. But the caveat for me was that I wanted a girl character, a girl ranger character, where it didn't matter that she was a girl. So I kind of described it to my friends like, I want girl Aragorn where nobody cares that she's a girl, where it's normal, to have a girl ranger. It's so normal as to be beyond comment. Because a lot of the stories that I was reading at the time had these strong girl characters who were training to be knights or training to be warriors, or they were magicians or something, but they were always in this world where they were elevated because they were women. They were special because they were women doing these things that were traditionally considered masculine. And I was kind of tired of that. And so I just, because again, going back to my job as a park ranger, some people, I've had a couple people ask me, why do you write these girl characters in these sort of unrealistic roles of, wilderness rangers and, ruling countries and that kind of thing. And I'm like, these are people I work with, and I'm not that I'm writing like, characters from the people I work with, but the rangers that I work with during the summer, I work with female law enforcement rangers and female foresters and female bear managers and, female firefighters and female administrators, people who are helping to run the park. And so to me, that's just my reality. It's not that it's not the National Park Service isn't an entirely balanced institution in terms of gender yet, but there are a lot of women doing really, really cool stuff and getting their hands dirty and helping to run these places. So, and in fact, one of the first jobs I ever worked in the backcountry, there was a crew of 3 conservationists who were basically working on building trail, and the only one of them who was chainsaw certified was one of the girls in the group. And so, my some of my earliest memories is helping her chainsaw a tree that had fallen into the path. So like, I don't know, this is my reality. It's not unusual or weird or not right for me. So Woodwalker was kind of born from these wanting to see a character that reflected that in a world where that was normal. And the reason it kind of happened when it did, like I said, I've always written for a long time, but the reason it sort of happened when it did was because I had just recently made a big jump, kind of turning point in my life, which was going from being a grad student full-time when I was doing research with the National Park Service, traveling all over the place, collecting my data at all these different national parks, graduating, defending my thesis, and then almost immediately the very next day turning around and being a stay-at-home mom. So my daughter had been born a few months before I finished my graduate degree. And I mean, it was literally like the day, like I defended my thesis, I went home, and that was it. From that moment on, I was stay-at-home mom, which was a huge shift. I'd been interacting with all these professionals and my colleagues and my peers and doing research and statistics and all kinds of gnarly stuff. And then all of a sudden my life was diapers and Cheerios, and which was great. I mean, as any parent, could attest, I love my children and I would not give them up for anything in the world, but it was a huge shift. And so after a while, especially after my second daughter was born, I kind of turned back to writing to help connect me to that person that I had been before motherhood. And so it was a way to kind of tether me back to that person that I had been, the ranger that I had been. And so my stories started getting a little bit more robust and a little bit more, a little bit more confident, I guess. And it got to the point where my husband was like, would you ever consider publishing one of these? And I said, this is really just for fun. And I don't really know anybody who has published a book. I don't know what goes into it. I don't know how that works, what I have to do. And he was like, well, I think maybe you should try. And I was like, yeah, okay, maybe I will. It was just like that one little nudge from my husband that really kind of sent me on that path to seek publication. And so once I had that thought in mind, like, I'm doing this anyway, I'm writing anyway, maybe I could try to seek publication. And a few days after we had that conversation, we went for the first hike as a family of 4 after I had my second daughter. It'd been a few months after she was born. And so finally, for the first time, the weather was nice and, we were all healthy and able to get outside. And so we went for our first hike. And after being kind of trapped inside for so long, it was funny because the trail itself wasn't anything special. It was just this little nature trail, in the woods close to our house, but it was like a transformative experience for me. And the whole time I was just pinging ideas off my husband, like, what if this, what if that, what if the character, does this, but then she's really trying to accomplish that. And, what if the world is this way? And so that hike was really what kind of drew all of those, the desire for a girl character in a world where she was allowed to be a girl character with no issues. The desire to kind of pull in some of the ranger experiences and the adventures that I'd had in the past, and the recognition that I had the ability to try to seek publication. That little hike kind of pulled all that stuff together. And I came back, and that night after getting the kids to sleep, I pulled up a Word document and started writing Woodwalker then. So that was kind of how it began. That was the birth of Woodwalker.
That's awesome. What was the time frame from that, like, that moment of writing to publication? Because I've talked with other authors, and sometimes it seems like, it just happens to be like the publishing company was looking for a book of that sort,
Yeah.
and they get on,
Yeah.
or on the other side, people have
Years and
been
years.
trying for years and years and years. What was your
Sure.
your experience?
Yeah. So from that moment that I started writing, almost to the day that it was published, it was about 2 years, which is a pretty short period of time. So, and there were all different kind of stepping stones that I had to hit along the way. But so first, of course, I had to write the thing, which took, because I was also stay-at-home mom with two small children. It took me about 8 months to write that first draft, and get it to a place where it was ready to be read by other people. So lots of tweaking and editing, and then I sent it out to some of my beta readers who were basically just friends and family who I knew would be honest with me. And they got back to me after a couple months, and I did some of their edits. And then it was during that time I was researching agents. And that was a thing, going into this, I didn't know, I had no idea what to expect. I had no idea what was expected of me. So I didn't know anything about, agents or agencies or really what they did or anything like that. So it was really the research that I did. I say this because I think a lot of people were similar to me in that they were kind of being held back in that they didn't really know anything about the industry, or that they felt like they needed an in somehow. And really, honestly, the internet has been the biggest assist, because it gave me the tools to be able to research, what is an agent and how do I query one, and what's the etiquette, because there is etiquette. How do I write a query letter, because that's really hard. So searching for that kind of thing, and doing a lot of research on that while my beta readers had my manuscript, was big. And so I set up my queries and sent out my first round, was rejected a whole bunch of times, and then sent out my second round and got two manuscript requests. One of them got back to me and said that it wasn't for her, and then the other one reached out and offered representation, and she's the one that I'm with now. And she then, after we signed, that was while I was spending a summer as a ranger in Yellowstone. So I actually signed with my agent in Yellowstone. And I just remember I didn't have any Wi-Fi signal. So I was running around in my ranger uniform, yelling at all my colleagues, I have an agent. And they were like, oh my gosh, what's wrong with you? So yeah. And so then we went on submission to publishers, and I think it was a couple weeks later, maybe a month and a half or so, that we signed with a publisher. And then it was probably 6 or 7 months after that. It was the publisher that I signed with, the imprint, is Harper Voyager Impulse, which is an imprint of HarperCollins. And they do this digital first publication, which was sort of their foray into ebooks, mainly ebook sales. I still get paperback sales, but I don't get hardbacks. Hardcover. And so it was a pretty quick turnaround. So that's part of the reason that it was a short time period, because it wasn't this long drawn out publication process. We went on submission. We were picked up by Harper Voyager, and my editor had some really great feedback. I did his edits, got them back to him, and it was really the start of the summer of 2016 that Woodwalker was published. So yeah, about a 2-year process, start to finish.
Now, for those who haven't read the book, I'm just going to read out, because your website's awesome, and it's got this little Twitter blurb that is just so concise on Woodwalker, is that the book's about an exiled ranger who is recruited by a queen in hiding to guide her through the mountains to reclaim her throne. And when I picked the book up, and after I finished reading it, there's a lot of things that struck me about your book that don't seem to happen in other books that I read. So I'd love to just share those with you. Is that you let, I guess I'll go over them and we can just talk about them. Is that you let the characters grow very naturally, and you let the reader, me, whoever, just get to know the characters and let them. They're actually they're very real and they're very relatable, and you start connecting with them, and you're like, okay, I kind of understand it. And you see them develop that relationship with each other. And then the other thing, and you could almost call it a character itself, is the travel into the mountains and the region and all that, because it's so detailed, and you like when I'm reading it and I start like visualizing it, it's this whole thing where you get such a vivid picture of what these characters are going through and what they're dealing with, and the hardships of going through this place, and it was so incredible.
Oh, thank you. I'm really that makes me feel really good, that last part, because that was that sort of environment as a character was something I was really going for. So that's really cool to hear you say that. Yeah. Well, the world building certainly was very heavily drawn on my time as a park ranger. And I've spent 3 years now, really. One was as an intern, 2 was in ranger uniform at Great Smoky Mountains National Park, which is fairly close to where I spend my off season. And so that was really the basis for the Silverwood Mountains. And I was really fortunate that one of the women I work with is an incredible wildcrafter. She calls herself a wildcrafter, a naturalist. And so I kind of picked her brain because May, the protagonist, has a lot of sort of medicinal skills, herbalism and recognizing the landscape around her and how to use the landscape around her. That's kind of part of her job. And so I was able to sort of pick this woman's brain and say, okay, so if someone was gonna, get poison ivy, what plant nearby, or what would my character go for to help resolve that issue? Or, if someone has a fever, what's she gonna do? If someone has an asthma attack, what are they gonna do? So that was really beneficial in terms of developing May's skill set and how she reacts to the world around her. But I think too, with May especially, a lot of it was kind of examining my own relationship with the natural world, sort of as a ranger, seeing both its function but also its kind of inherent worth. That's beyond whatever use people can make of it. And I think May has sort of a balance of that, where she very much reveres her land, the land that she's from and this environment that she's in. But she also, she's practical. She's a very practical character as well. And she knows that this is the technology in this culture is, it's kind of Lord of the Rings-esque technology. There's no gunpowder. It's a sort of an ancient culture in terms of technology. And so she knows that, the people in this country and they themselves on this journey are going to rely on the environment to sustain them. Mm-hmm. And so it's this sort of dual relationship of having a real sense of wonder and awe and reverence, balanced with that practicality as well. So, and then just the relationship between her and the other characters. Mona, she and Mona are really fun to write together because May's very sort of grungy, outdoorsy, not very refined, and Mona's very elegant and very cool and almost kind of imposing in a way. And it's fun to write the two of them because they start out very much at odds, and then they develop this relationship over the course of that book and the other books as well that turns into this really deep-seated friendship. So it was really fun sort of letting that unfold and in some cases sort of writing it very purposefully, and then in some cases just sort of seeing where they took me and letting them kind of develop their own relationship. So yeah, that was a lot of fun.
I do have to say there was a part of the book, and I'm not going to spoil it for those who are listening because I really want people to go out and read the book, but there's a part of the book near the end where you kind of had like this twist in Woodwalker, and I was like, what is going on? Like, I had to put the book down because I was so shocked and blown away that what I had read earlier was totally not what I was expecting. And then to get that twist, and I was like, are you kidding me? Like, it blew me away.
And that's a very a polarizing part of the manuscript, because some people really, really love it and they're like, oh my gosh, that was amazing. And then some people are like, this undermined the integrity of this entire manuscript. So it's like, to each their own. But yeah, some people, come up to me and they're like, oh, I saw it coming from the very beginning. And a lot of people, most frequently, they kind of suspected something was off, but they couldn't put their finger on it. And then some people like my mom were just totally blindsided. They were like, where did this, like, when did you this? No, this isn't how. And she was like, I have to go back and read the thing again to figure out, so it's kind of funny that particular moment is there are a lot of opinions on that particular moment. But yeah, it was really fun. My editor helped me a lot there, kind of, writing the story in a way that was believable from both angles. So, because, she's telling the truth ultimately, sort of. And so writing it in a way, and that's a tough type of twist, type of manuscript to write, because you don't want the reader to feel cheated. You don't want them to feel like you've been lying the whole time. And so my editor really helped me kind of, make sure that was really watertight and that you could go back. And again, going back to that series that I love, the Queen's Thief series, it's similar in that you can read it a second time and pick up on all these things that you missed before. And it's almost like reading an entirely different book because you know now where it's going. So yeah, I had a lot of fun with that one.
And then you released another book earlier this year, and that continues the story, but this time with Mona as the central figure, which I have to say I have not read that one yet. But I'm very interested, and I'm excited to see where Mona goes, because Mona was one of those characters where I flip-flopped a lot with her on Woodwalker, whether I liked her or not.
Yeah.
And ultimately I like her, but I'm not sure, I like her, but I think I'd keep her at a distance. I really connected with May, and I connected with Mona's brothers, but it was like, okay, Mona is very much I like you, but over there.
Over there. Yeah, you're not alone. A lot of people express that to me, but the kind of cool thing is that a lot of people who have read Ashes to Fire have told me that, I went into this not really sure, Mona's kind of, she's so severe and so imposing and comes off sometimes as really finicky or fussy. And then they said, reading Ashes to Fire, they were really kind of surprised by how much they started rooting for Mona and kind of pulling for her. So that's really cool to hear. I was intimidated to write Mona because I love May. She's very near and dear to my heart, and she's really fun to write because she's always got a quip or a witticism or something for any situation. Whereas Mona is so much more. She keeps all of her emotions kind of bottled up inside, and we get some glimpses in Woodwalker of why she is that way, and the responsibilities placed on Mona from a very young age. And kind of this image of having to, since childhood, she's been a queen and expected to uphold a certain image and rule her country. And so it's really kind of warped her. She didn't really have a childhood or really much of a young adulthood. She's just always been a queen. And so we see that come in a lot more in Ashes to Fire, in her decisions and her perceptions of the world around her and of the people that she meets and the relationships she starts to have and build. And so I was really, like I said, I was kind of intimidated. I was like, how am I going to humanize her and make her someone that people can relate to? But it ended up kind of being able to get in her head and explore her backstory and why she would react to certain things the way she does. It really did kind of open her up in a way that I didn't expect. I actually had way more issues with my third protagonist than I did with Mona, which I didn't expect at all. So a lot of people have said that they weren't so sure about Mona as a protagonist, but after reading Ashes to Fire, they were on board. So that's always really good to hear.
And Ashes to Fire follows Mona in her journey because after the events of Woodwalker, Mona has to do stuff for her people, essentially.
Right.
And so
right.
that's the central plot of the second book, right?
Yeah, so it's kind of a fall. And actually, I started writing Woodwalker as a standalone novel. It wasn't meant to be a series. And it was towards the end that I really started realizing, hey, these things have the bigger implication than I originally had in mind. And so I started thinking ahead, where would this lead? What is this going to lead to? And it really seemed like the next installment in the trilogy was more in Mona's hands. More of the ramifications of book one fell on Mona. And so that was a big player in me deciding to do this, where each of the three books has a different narrator. And their stories all intertwine, and they're all characters in each other's books, but each one is sort of headed by a different character. And so that's really what led to that decision. And yeah, it's really her trying to kind of, I guess, solidify the actions at the end of book one, and make things a little bit more stable. And of course, because it's a book and it needs chaos, it all sort of falls apart very quickly, and she finds herself in situations that she didn't expect. But yeah, so it's definitely a continuation of the conclusion of book one, and book three then is the continuation of that plot line as well.
And book three, which is Creatures of Light, comes out on January 23rd. So it'll be,
yes,
if you're listening to this podcast will be coming out on January 15th. So you've got a nice little lead time to get the first two books read, and then jump on to Creatures of Light. Now, is Creatures of Light the wrap-up for the series, or is there going to be more?
Well, for this trilogy, and I should clarify, January 23rd is the ebook release. So again, my publisher does this ebook first publication.
Yep.
So right now, you can pre-order the ebook, and on January 23rd, you'll be able to buy the ebook, but the paperback won't be available for pre-order until after the ebook has released. So it's kind of weird. The ebook is sort of like, it's almost like a soft release, and then the paperback comes out a few weeks later, but I won't have any of those dates until after the ebook is released. So I'll get all that stuff up online, when I have that information. But yeah, so the ebook comes out January 23rd, and it is the wrap up to this trilogy. The kind of big story arc of this trilogy is tied up in book three. But I do have some other work that's kind of spin-off series from what's happening in this particular trilogy. And one of them that I started a while back is many years in the future, and actually features the characters that we have in the Creatures of Light trilogy, but also the protagonists are really their children. So it's more, that was actually kind of my attempt at writing a more young adult series, and having the characters being just a little bit younger than they are in the Creatures of Light series. But I've since also been working on another little bit with some of the characters that we have in Creatures of Light, which I haven't told many people, David. So, so there is some other plot lines kind of swirling around on my computer screen with some of the characters that we have in Creatures of Light, but it's all very, very early stages right now. So I think you could probably expect to see more from some of these characters and some spin-off series in the world that we're in. But Creatures of Light does finish out this trilogy in terms of the plot that was started in Woodwalker.
And I guess my last question for you before we wrap this up is, how do you balance everything that you do between your writing, your work, your family life, your illustrating? Like, do you sleep at all, or is it more of like Monday is this day or Tuesday is this day?
Gosh, I wish it was that structured. No, a lot of it is, I mean, it's tough, and finding time is an issue for any writer. I mean, you have to make the time. You don't find the time, you make the time, right? You have to sacrifice certain things. So yeah, for me, it's really trying to prioritize and commit to whatever it is I'm prioritizing at the moment. So of course my family is first, right? My family has to be my main priority. And so when I'm with them, and I don't always do this well, and I am always trying to get better at this, but when I'm with my family, I'm trying to be in family mode. If my girls are home and they're active and I need to be involved with them, I'm not going to get, first of all, I'm not going to get quality writing done during that time. And I'm not going to be a very good mom, if I'm trying to focus on writing while they need me. So trying to prioritize, that and focus on that when I need to, but also, recognizing that, okay, now this is my writing time and this is what I'm going to focus on. And my girls now are old enough that they kind of understand that and they can respect that. And they've actually started kind of telling their own stories and drawing pictures and stuff too, which I think they think is just like what people do, which is kind of funny. And so they're at the point where they're usually pretty good about giving me an hour of writing time and occupying themselves coloring in their coloring books or, playing outside or whatever. So really, and my husband too is on board, and that's really helpful because he knows, some nights the laundry's just not going to get folded because I have a deadline and I need to finish what I'm working on. So really prioritizing whatever it is I'm working on and focusing on that. And then being willing to sacrifice, recognizing that we watch less movies. I don't get to watch, I don't get to binge watch Netflix or, TV or kind of mindlessly scroll the internet as much anymore. I still do, but so making those sacrifices and making the time because that's how it works. So so like I said, I'm not always great at it. There are plenty of times when I'm completely scatterbrained and trying to focus on too many things at once, but definitely trying to focus on whatever it is I'm working on at the moment is a big thing.
And for those who have listened and they're interested in finding you on the internet or finding your books or finding your artwork, what are some of the best places for them to go to?
Yeah, so my online website, which is sort of the hub for everything, is emilybmartin.me. And that's just the single B, emilybmartin.me. But my username for social media is Emily BEE, as in the insect, Emily B. Martin. And that's you can find me under that username on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and Tumblr. But all of those links are on my website. So social media links, buy links for my books. Most of them lead to Amazon, but there are some really great local booksellers in my region that carry my books. Greenville, South Carolina has some bookstores that have my books, and or of course local libraries. You can always request books there. So but my website is going to be the main place where you can kind of jump off into my portfolios and my online social media feeds and that kind of thing.
Awesome. And I will have those links on our show notes and our website and Facebook page, and everyone can go check you out on your site and get your books in time to get ready for Creatures of Light ebook on January 23rd. And then I will make sure to update on my social media stuff once you have the release date for your paperback, so that way everyone else can jump on if they don't like ebooks and get pre-orders for that. And cool. Emily, it's been such a pleasure and honor to get to talk with you for the podcast. It's so, I don't know, it's so incredible to talk with people. Like, I've read books and I have the books on the bookshelf, and now I get to talk to people about the books that I've read and the characters, and it's so much fun.
Well, thank you so much. This was a lot of fun. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to Tales from the Fandom. Subscribe to us on iTunes or your podcast app of choice. Follow us on Facebook at www.facebook.com/talesfromthefandom to see photos, links, leave feedback, and check out upcoming guests. If you'd like to be a guest, email David at talesfromthefandom@gmail.com.